Peace. What's up, everybody? I hope this dishwasher isn't too loud, but today I want to read something from the Delectable Negro. I found this in the used bookstore in Jacksonville. It's called Chamberlain Book Mine. And shout out to Tyreek Nasheed because he's the one who brought this book up and brought it to my attention. And when I was just browsing in the bookstore, I came across it and I was like, well, I got to check this out. Now, the title is The Delectable Negro, Human Consumption and Homoeroticism Within U.S. Slave Culture. And this is by Vincent Woodard. Now, the back of it says, scholars of U.S. and transatlantic slavery have largely ignored or dismissed accusations that Black Americans were cannibalized. Vincent Woodard takes an enslaved person's claims of human consumption seriously, focus on both the literal starvation of the slave and the tropes of cannibalism on the part of the slaveholder, and further draws attention to the ways in which Blacks experience their consumption as a fundamentally homoerotic occurrence. The Delectable Negro explores these connections between homoeroticism, cannibalism, and cultures of consumption in the context of U.S. literature and U.S. slave culture. Utilizing many staples of African American literature and culture, such as the slave narratives of Olaudah Equiano, Harriet Jacobs, and Frederick Douglass, as well as other less circulated materials like James L. Smith's Slaves Narrative and numerous articles from 19th century Black newspaper. Woodard traces the racial assumptions, political aspirations, gender codes, and philosophical frameworks that dictated both European and white American arousal toward Black males and hunger for Black male flesh. Woodard uses these texts to unpack how slaves struggled not only against social consumption, but also against endemic mechanisms of starvation and hunger designed to break them. Now, what's interesting is, this is just going to be information. Do with that information as you will. But it's extremely important for us to know our history, so we have a better view of what's going on today. Because, we see all this gender war stuff, and to me, it's not surprising because, they've pitted us against one another. And I also know that a lot of us, majority of us, aren't operating within our right mind. There's a whole lot of trauma. So I'm going to start with chapter 5, actually. And this chapter is called Eating Nat Turner. All right, so here goes. And for those of you just tuning in, again, we're looking at the Delectable Negro. All right, so it says, most people do not readily associate Nat Turner, the heroic figure and slave insurrectionist, with the themes of auto-cannibalism, that's self-consumption, white male consumption desires, or homoeroticism. These themes, however, strongly informed how Southampton, Virginia, whites punished Turner and treated his corpse after his public lynching. Now, what I just noticed is that they said this took place in Southampton, Virginia. Right now on my channel, I'm reading Nathan McCall's Makes Me Want to Holler, and he went to a prison called Southampton. So this is taking place in the same area. Wow. What a coincidence. All right, so these themes, however, strongly informed how Southampton, Virginia, whites punished Turner and treated his corpse after his public lynching. In the 19th century, the white press throughout the country reported that Turner had sold his body for dissection and spent the money on ginger cakes. Many papers reported that Turner feasted on these sweet ginger cakes before his own execution. This was an erroneous assertion, as slaves did not own themselves and therefore had no agency to barter and trade their own flesh. More than anything, this ginger cake story reflected the psychology of whites who needed to convince themselves that black men such as Turner somehow consented to and were complicit in their social consumption. This linking of consent to black self consumption was a common idea that found its way into lynching rituals, practices in the late 19th and earliest 20th centuries. In 1934, whites made Claude Neal, whom they lynched in Jackson County, Florida, eat his cut off penis and testicles. James McGovern relates the details in a Neal lynching, An Anatomy of a Lynching. And this is a quote from that. After taking the nigger to the woods about 4 miles from Greenwood, they cut off his penis. They made him to eat it. Then they cut off his testicles and made him eat them and say he liked it. So, one of the reasons they don't like us talking about this because it does paint those people in a certain light. Like you really get to see, okay, whoever participates in this, those people were truly barbaric. And honestly, that's not that long ago that they were doing this to us. 1934, my grandfather was alive in 1934. Let's see, it goes on to say, making Neal eat his own sexual organs, as grotesque as this was only a byproduct of an even more disturbing reality of white hunger and power. The cutting off and forced eating of the penis was a reflection of white male oral fixations upon black male virility and black men as a sexual threat. In a different erotic scenario, the white men might have taken the black penis into their own mouths or anuses, but in the absence of such imaginative privacy, they used the black male body as a type of puppet through which they grapple with, and ultimately subdue their hungers for black male flesh and sex. On a level of ritual, it is not enough to simply desire and want to consume Neal. The ritual is not complete until he eats the evidence of white desire, swallowing his debasement and degradation along with white hunger and erotic fascination. That's disturbing. I was looking at the roast of Tom Brady, and it's a lot of weird jokes that they're making during that roast. And even Kevin Hart came out and said, yo, y'all white guys, y'all making a lot of like dick jokes. He said, what is it with y'all and dicks? And there's something to that, because you notice that they play around with that type of stuff, and that's not something that we do. And again, if you're just now tuning in, I'm reading from The Delectable Negro. You can find this on Amazon. I found it in the used bookstore called Chamberlain Book Mine. All right, so let's see. Continuing, it says, many whites feared that Turner would literally rise from the grave and rebone himself. This is how some have explained the gruesome cannibalization of Turner after his death. William Sidney Drury, a member of the Southampton community, documented in the Southampton insurrection the exact methods of punishment and post-mortem abuse of Turner's body. According to Drury, after Turner was executed, his body was delivered to doctors who skinned it and made grease of the flesh. Mr. R.S. Barham's father owned a money purse made of his hide. This desire to literally possess Turner's flesh and make use of his body calls to mind the homoerotics of the Neal scenario, with Turner's flesh serving as fetish and symbol of corporeal possession. The money purse made of Turner's skin and the grease made from his boiled down flesh conveyed the limitless consumptive uses of the slave and the myriad ways in which the ruling class could satiate unspoken desires and tastes for Negro flesh. Blacks of the Southampton community further complicated this erotics of taste through accusations that whites ingested Turner's boiled down flesh as a medical substance, as I discussed earlier. So they turned him into grease. They used his skin for a purse, and now they're saying what they said, they digested it as a medical substance, like it was going to give them some type of healing factor. That's pretty disgusting. But this was like a common practice. These were the type of things that went on that don't get talked about enough. They rather us just, forget that. And that's why it's so important to, keep seeking out knowledge. Let's see, where was I? Um, mhm. Okay, William Straighton brought all of this suppressed homoerotic and consumptive history to the fore with the publication of the Confessions of Nat Turner. Straighton's confessions and the debate that surrounded it clarified, like no moment before had, why black people have maintained a tight-lipped silence on the subject of homoeroticism under slavery. Homoeroticism, especially in the context of Turner's legacy, brought up for black people in the 1960s unspeakable issues of whites, consumption of blacks, sexual objectification, bestial treatment under a white regime, and the inconceivable topic of auto cannibalism, blacks made to eat one another and themselves during slavery. The 1960s was a moment when the legacy of black consumption under slavery culminated around the activist platforms and ideologies of the civil rights and black power movements. The subjects of slavery, homosexuality, and cannibalism took front page prominence in newspapers and in newspapers and journals, editorials, speakouts, and mediated conversations between blacks and whites. In this chapter, I used the Black Radical 1960s to further illuminate the myriad social, spiritual, political, and moral implications of white hunger for and consumption of the black male during slavery. Issues of memory and temporarily figure prominently in this chapter and drive my desire to understand the emotional and psychic forces that accrued around Turner's person, lending his life a mythic and trans-historical significance in the 1960s. Some of the black men who responded collectively to Straighton's novel in the widely read Nat Turner, 10 Black Writers Respond, accused Straighton of institutionalized cannibalism of attempting to eat Nat Turner. These black men referred to the legacy of white cannibalism that I discussed in earlier chapters. In this mid 20th century moment, characterized by political activism, black self determination, and anti apartheid efforts at home and abroad, black people powerfully linked individual and institutional consumption of the Negro to a negative understanding of homosexuality and effeminacy. The implicit homoerotics of flesh tasting and the particulars of white culinary appetite for black flesh congealed in this moment. One thing that was clarified through this union and in the context of national debate was why, during and beyond slavery, it has been so difficult for black people to talk openly about homoeroticism and furthermore, to talk in complex ways about the linkage among black male gender formation, intimacy patterns originating in slavery, same-sex desire, and racial uplift. So there's a lot more in this chapter, but I think this is definitely something that's worth the read. Let's go to the front of it, and I can read off some of these titles to the chapters. Let's see, table of contents. So you have cannibalism in transatlantic context, sex, honor, and human consumption, a tale of hunger retold, ravishment and hunger in F. Douglass's life and writing. So that's about Frederick Douglass. Domestic rituals of consumption, the chapter I was just looking at, eating Nat Turner, and chapter 6, which is the hungry nigger. And even more importantly, he has a lot of notes in the bibliography, so you can go and look this stuff up yourself. Now, this book came out in 2014, so it hasn't been out that long, But I think it's definitely something that's worth the read. Again, this is the Delectable Negro: Human Consumption and Homoeroticism Within U.S. Slave Culture. You know how in certain states they're trying to ban our history from being taught. There's certain things they don't want to bring up. And this is probably one of those things. Now, you can't leave it up to your enemy to educate you, because why would he give you the best education possible? He benefits, or they benefit from you not knowing, truths about yourselves and the truth about what they are capable of. So every time I hear people say, well, nah, they wouldn't do that, the government wouldn't do that, I'm always thinking, oh, yes, they would. It's extremely possible and likely for them to do just about anything. If you're willing to eat a person, chop them up, do all these things to mutilate the body, I don't put anything past you. And like I said, you can't leave it up to your enemy to educate you. So like this information, you're going to have to go out and search it on your own. One of the things I suggest, whatever city you find yourself in, look up the used bookstore. You probably have more than one. And just go in there and browse. I guarantee you're probably going to find something. And that's another way that I see how the game is played. You miseducate the people, right? So if you start off with school and you never really learn to read properly, or you're always reading at a lower level, then you're not going to really want to go out and research, because it's going to be something that's difficult for you to do, because reading is difficult. But if you have a smartphone and you have a computer, any word that you come across, you can type it in on Google and they'll tell you how to pronounce it. They'll tell you how to use it in a sentence. So you can add that to your vocabulary. If you have trouble with reading, there's reading help available online for free. So I really suggest you get that for yourself or for your loved ones. And make sure your children are coming up and not just being taught at school. Because again, your enemy is not going to tell you this stuff. They'd rather you not even think about it. We live in a society where it's education, where it's entertainment over education. And that's something that needs to be flipped around. So, I'm going to go through and read this and take some notes. And I'll be back to give y'all a more in-depth take on this book. But it's kind of disturbing. Like I try to, detach myself emotionally from it, so I'm not reading and just being like pissed off the entire time. But it's difficult because I know these are things that was really happening and probably still happening. All these missing people, all these missing black people, I don't think that's just a coincidence. There's something being done. But anyway, if you haven't already, make sure you check out the audiobook that I'm reading online. It's called Nathan McCall's Makes Me Wanna Holler. I think I'm up to like chapter 22 now. I just uploaded that. It's a really great story. And what I just realized while reading this chapter is that the place that Nathan McCall got sent to prison in Virginia is called Southampton. And where Nat Turner was lynched is Southampton. So what are the chances of that? Well, anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. And I'll catch y'all next time with another episode of Ron's Library and Ideas. Peace.